John, thanks so much for coming on here.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Happy to be here, man.
For those that may not know the name, you might recognize it for some of the things that you've been seeing. Probably biggest in the last year is Pennywise, the story of it. And this release is amazing. This is, the first Screambox original release. You can even see it's got spine number 1 on this, and the inner art, which a lot of people have been seeing recently. So we're going to be talking about that. And one of the ones that a lot of people may laugh at because that's such a big deal. I more want to talk about the fact that you were on this release, Attack of the Killer Refrigerator, as the documentary Snapper. But we're going to dive into it. Pennywise, the story of it, you're listed as the director. Can you tell us how you got on board that project?
Sure, yeah. I was the co-director with Chris Griffiths. The short version is I had done my first documentary, and that was done and out in the world. And then I really was, thinking about what I wanted to do for my next project, and I was gravitating towards, films that had an impact on me when I was a kid. And one of them was the miniseries, It. And so I thought, man, I really want to do this documentary, but doing it on my own really wasn't an option. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just start writing articles about, I'll interview people from the cast and crew. And long story short, I ended up connecting with Gary Smart, who's a producer out in the UK, Dead Mouse Productions. And he had been thinking about doing a documentary about the miniseries as well. We didn't know each other at the time, but we sort of swam in the same circles. So we connected and talked about it and said, let's join forces and do that documentary. And so that's what we did.
I spent the week enveloping myself in your work. I watched both of these again this week.
God, I'm so sorry.
I'm not. Funny enough, Snapper we're going to get to, but I have fallen in love with that thing. It is such a fun documentary. But the one thing that I kind of want to highlight is something that you just alluded to, which seems to be cropping up in these last couple of years, is that there are a lot of people that are either just straight fans of something from the 80s or 90s, or they get a wild hair and it's turning into this small wave of fan-made documentaries. And some of them are great, some of them are decent, some of them are lesser than those, but they're at least interesting enough to be done. And some people are literally pouring years worth of work into some of these. So other than a production company, do you feel like there's major differences behind a fan documentary and something like Pennywise, the story of it?
Well, I mean, I think at the heart of it, Pennywise is kind of a fan documentary. I think if I'm being honest, like I squint when I hear fan documentary in connecting with anything I'm involved in, because maybe wrongly so, I assume that means it's less than a film or something that's professional. I think I've always equated fan documentary to mean amateur, which maybe is not always fair. I don't think people, when they say fan documentary, they're not saying that necessarily every time. But no, I think, I think being a fan of something and then making a documentary about it is a slippery slope. I learned that in my first documentary on Pet Sematary. It's hard to be objective. It's hard to point out flaws in a film that you love. Yeah. Because you necessarily don't see the flaws. But on the other side of that, I think for me, I won't speak for anybody else, but, I've seen a lot of films that I've loved over the years come out, on Blu-ray or whatever, under some pretty big studios that maybe, in my opinion, haven't given the retrospective elements the attention they've deserved, and sort of left fans feeling a bit unsatisfied. For sure. And so I think for me personally, at least my early motivation with doing stuff like Unearthed and Untold and then Pennywise was kind of like seeing a void in the market and a void in the fandom that I myself as a fan wanted to see. And so I just said, well, I mean, I guess I'll do it, and I think Gary and Chris and others that I've been working with probably have a similar feeling of like, it's time to tell these stories, you know, whether it's RoboCop or it's Fright Night or Hellraiser. Like we see a void in the market and decide to step in and do something about it.
One thing I really love about Pennywise, and the reason I asked that question specifically, is because it feels like what in my heart a fan documentary should be, and that is a loving, really passionate story about something that affected a lot of people without inputting the director's voice necessarily into it, but putting the director's passion forward. And it oozes out of pretty much everything in Pennywise.
No, I appreciate it, man. I mean, I'm glad I'm glad you feel that way. I think, yeah, like I said, it's the big hurdle for me on Pennywise was being objective.
Yeah.
And I was me personally was much better at doing that than I was on Pet Sematary documentary because, for all kinds of reasons, I just didn't even think to go there. Like, let's just talk about how everyone had a great time making it. It's a great film, but also a lot of people don't think it's a great film, and it did have flaws. And I think if I could go back and do that documentary over, I would have added some of that to just make it feel more well-rounded.
Right.
And so when it came to Pennywise, you know, I remember very early on feeling like I really advocated for, we need to show all sides of what people thought about the spider, for example. You know, and that's no secret if you know the miniseries that people have a lot of opinions about the spider. And there were other things that we could get into with Pennywise that showcased sort of the limitations that miniseries had in terms of maybe what they could show on TV at that time or whatever. But I wanted it to feel more well-rounded, like we gave it a fair assessment, you know? Yeah. And you know, my partners on the documentary we were in lockstep with that and tried to do that as best we could. And also maybe give the spider some redemption, because I think Bart Mixon and some of the other people sort of, you know, talk about what the spider was capable of doing and maybe how it was shot that maybe contributed to it having the legacy that it has. So
funny enough, that was one of the best parts of the whole thing, because you got so much more in depth than pretty much anything that we've seen before on that process.
Well, and that, you know, that's a huge thanks to Bart Mixon. I mean, you know, Gary and Chris and Adam knew Bart from their work on the Fright Night documentaries. And then they had started RoboCop. And I had met Bart loosely through the Pet Sematary world. But I think independently, Gary and I discovered that he had all this amazing footage from the set and all this stuff. And, you know, it is sort of Bart's kind of baby. And so that was the other catalyst that brought us together to make this documentary, is that we went into it knowing that we had all this amazing archive that no one had seen before. I mean, what a great place to start, you know? And Bart's super collaborative and giving and very generous and was just like, use whatever you need. Like, let's just, you know, make it as good of a doc as you can. And that's not always the case with people, especially when they know they're sitting on something that no one else has, you know. I mean, Bart made it very easy, and the doc wouldn't be what it is if it weren't for Bart. So.
Yeah, that stuff is like gold. I mean, that alone can be a major selling point, especially for major fans. And
it was.
Nowadays, it is that fandom that people are holding on to so dearly. And with the new movies and everything, it's kind of lit the world on fire for Pennywise. Yeah, no, it's cool, man. Gary and I always joke. We say, like, man, when we were kids, if Tim Curry Pennywise action figures had existed, I mean, it's almost better that they didn't. Yeah, because we would have had to rely on our parents to buy them, and I'm not sure that would have happened. So in some ways, it's better that this stuff has been popping up to market as adults, because we can actually go and buy this stuff. So, but no, it's cool. It's cool to see what's happened with the new films and just sort of this revived interest in that IP. You know, it's cool. Did it feel like there was a lot more pressure on this one, since the fandom is a lot more vocal than perhaps for Pet Sematary? 100%. I mean, Pet Sematary wasn't crowdfunded, first of all. Right. So we didn't have people that had put money into it kind of banging on the door. At that time,
2011, 2012. I mean, I was on Facebook, and Justin White, my partner on that, was on Facebook, but we created a Facebook page for it. But other than that, we didn't have like a strong social media presence. So we kind of were flying under the radar for a long time. And then between Pennywise being a crowdfunded project, between presumably it having probably a bigger following, and then the new films coming out right at the time, and when there was huge pressure. I still kind of feel the pressure. I don't even know if I should be, but I think it was huge pressure to do it and get it out as quickly as we could. Which, let's face it, when you're an indie filmmaker like we all are on this team, that have full-time jobs, that have families, mortgages, pets, people that count on us, parents that are aging that you got to deal with. I mean, it's hard to make a film, and you don't want to just rush it because people are pressuring you. Like, let's just get it out as quickly as possible. And then it's shit. You don't want to do that either. There was a lot of pressure on all of us, In terms of archive that no one has seen before, I think we felt like we've exhausted. I mean, you're always going to find stuff.
Yeah.
And as an archivist, that keeps me up at night, knowing like what's still in people's basements or attics that I don't know about. But you'll never finish something if that's the way you. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we felt like it was time to finish this, bring it to market. We had a product. Let's try to get it distributed. Let's get it seen. We had worked on it long enough. And you're right. You can tinker forever, but that was never the objective.
Right. More so, I want to be inspiring with this because even though you can tinker forever, this is the product. This is it. This is that was not a pun intended, by the way. This is exactly what it seemed like you were shooting for, and it came out as this full rounded, completely by itself, set apart product. And I'm just happy that it came out the way it did because it seemed to get a fair amount of fanfare last year. Yeah,
I mean it's been fairly positive. I mean, I'm glad you're excited about it. I mean, I think a lot of people have been, and we're all proud of it. And it's great that people are seeing it, and it's been it's been well received, which is great. That was always the point, at least from the beginning,
Snapper. Let's move on to that one, because this thing,
please.
How for people that have never seen it, how do you, like, off the cuff, try to shout out Snapper as something that they should absolutely spend some time on?
How do I advocate for it?
Yeah.
Man, that's a good question. Boy. Well, I mean, I think films are fucking hard to get made.
Oh, yeah.
Any kind of film. And I think more films probably flounder and don't get made, or don't reach market, don't reach an audience, than the films that do.
Absolutely.
Especially nowadays. And so I think if you're somebody that grew up in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, and you had access to a camcorder and you tried to make a little movie with your buddies, or had aspirations to be a filmmaker at that age, you might enjoy Snapper. If you like kind of an underdog story, if you like watching, two buddies that have been friends for decades that are just creative and are just trying to make stuff, you might get something out of Snapper. If you like snapping turtles, as the lowest common denominator here, you'd like Snapper probably. I think there's a little bit of something in there for everybody in a tight 30-minute runtime.
Yep. That was one of the best parts about it for me. And the thing is it wasn't overly long to a point where it was attempted to make this into a longer feature than the movie that never got made itself. So for those that have not taken the time to see this yet, the whole title is Snapper. I believe it's the man-eating turtle movie that never got made, right?
Nailed it.
Okay, so there is so much to glean from the 30 minutes that are in this. It is so hard to oversell a short documentary that has a man jumping off of a balcony on fire, fake underwater turtle scenes that are filmed in such a perfect way that it looks better than actual underwater footage sometimes. People, just languishing in the fact that they were able to shoot lakeside right next to a highway with no actual permit. And it's such an inspiring way to give people on film
16 millimeter,
not with an iPhone in 2023.
No, they were loading up film.
It is an inspiring way to have people look at this and go, well, damn it, you have no excuse. Everything was poured into this thing, and it's so wonderfully done. And again, you really nailed the message behind it, because it's so easy to look at it and go, I just want to be having fun with my friends like this. This is perfect. Yeah,
thanks, man. It was kind of an unplanned documentary. I mean, I've known Mike and Mark Vo and Mike Savino for years at this point. And I think we met just because they're regional, they're local. I mean, they're in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I knew of their Killer Fridge film for forever, and was writing an article about it. There it is. Yeah, TerraVision did a great job. I think I was interviewing them for an article about Killer Fridge for my buddy Josh Schaefer's magazine, Lunch Meat VHS magazine, and we were headed to a convention right after. And Mark said to me, as I was I had hugged him and I was leaving the convention. And that's how I remember it anyway. And he said to me, I know you love Jaws. Like we tried to make this movie about a killer snapping turtle. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool, man. Like that's quirky, And then like a day or two later, I got a text message from him, and he had sent me one of the pictures of the animatronic turtle heads that they built. And I was like, holy shit, you really did go for this. And so then, like, we kept talking about it, and I discovered that they had a lot of archive from that project, like home movie footage, photos. And I don't know what it was, man. Like, something clicked in my head of, like, let's tell this story about this movie that didn't get made. And they kept saying to me when I was putting it together, they were like, yeah, but what's the story? There's no movie. And I was like, yeah, guys, I know, I got it. And then I'd go home and be like, what's the story? There was no movie. Like, but I felt like there was something there.
Right.
And not to give it away if people haven't seen it yet, but like for me, the doc really was more just about, it was a buddy story. It was about these two guys, and their perseverance to just keep making stuff, keep writing, keep just trying, the grind of trying to make movies. It was less about Snapper, but that being said, there was a lot of cool footage that has survived that we tried to fit as much as we could into the documentary. And that has sort of lit a fuse for me of like wanting to tell more stories about lost movies or unmade movies. I've got a good buddy up in Toronto, Dave Alexander, that wrote a great book called Untold Horror that you've got to check out if you don't know it. I've got a copy. I'm going to plug the shit out of it. Hold on.
Yeah, please.
Hardcover. Untold Horror. Nice. He interviewed George Romero before he died, Joe Dante, all these guys about scripts, projects, and stuff that never materialized and why. And it is fascinating. It's a cool read. And so, there's an appetite, I think, for just hearing about stuff that could have been. And it's fun to fantasize and imagine, like a movie that could have happened. So anyway, that's the story of Snapper. But I had a hell of a time making it. My buddy Dave Bigelow, who was an editor and colorist, who I'm working with on a couple projects, cut that with me, and it was over COVID. We shot the interviews for Snapper right before everything went into lockdown. It was like that November, December.
Oh, geez.
And then stuff shut down like February, March. And then we were like, all right, let's put Snapper together. So that was like the next 6 months putting that film.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So it sounds like Snapper was not only, inspiring for us that are watching it, but potentially inspiring for you as you were making it.
Oh, hugely, man. Yeah. I mean, just like just the perseverance of just, not only just trying to make stuff, but when stuff doesn't happen for you, like when things fall apart, just being able to continue, and you've seen Snapper, so like what the next thing was for them. Yeah. They just kept pushing and they had a little bit of success and, they just kept going. And yeah, that's super, encouraging and inspiring,
And without seeing it, I'm sure it doesn't make as much sense, but the perseverance thing, it's more apt here because we're talking decades. These are friends that have been together for years and years. And the way that they are still, literally persevering to be following their dreams and making things that they want to see, it's genuinely inspiring. And nobody else would have seen that if it weren't for you getting that text message.
Yeah, no, that's kind of what started it. I mean, I think, that people were aware of Killer Refrigerator. It's sort of this coveted VHS, sells for crazy money. And so, but yeah, I think maybe Snapper helped kind of like, light a spark for them to keep at it. And that's cool. I mean, that's wonderful,
Looks like Snapper might be coming to VHS on Lunch Meat soon.
It'll be the third release of it on VHS. Yeah, we did 2 sellout runs of it on Lunch Meat, which was cool. And so, yeah, Josh was like, let's do it again in April. And so I said, let's do it. So, yeah. So I think it's coming soon. I mean, the fact that we have all that behind-the-scenes footage on VHS, it was the VHS era. It makes perfect sense. So when Josh was like, you want to do it? I was like, yeah, I didn't have to think about it. Like, hell yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, let's do it.
So lost film for Snapper. It's looking like you're working on another lost film, Bigfoot. Can you tell us about this Sasquatch project?
Yeah, so Sasquatch, which is the name of the film, is a lost Bigfoot horror film from the mid-'70s that was filmed entirely in Massachusetts. And I've known about this film for years, and you look it up online. People have sort of talked about it in the blog world, and it's sort of this kind of coveted lost Bigfoot movie. And my good buddy Matt, who I went to grad school with, he's a big genre film fan like I am, and he has known about it for a long time. And
nice. Long
story short, we decided last year that let's try to tell this story. Let's try to find it if we can. So we've been shooting interviews. We just wrapped pretty much. We've been shooting interviews since October, and with cast and crew and locals that remember the movie.
Wow.
And so we've got 13 interviews in the can and a lot of cool B-roll, taking us from Santa Monica, California to Lowell, Massachusetts to Vermont. And I think we have a cool story. And there's a lot I can't say about it. I would love to.
Of course.
But yes, it's a lost film. And yeah, we're telling that story. So I think people are going to be psyched, man. I'm excited about it. I think we got a cool little project on our hands.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And
I'm biased, but
if it's anything like Snapper, I am all in, and it almost sounds like it's going to be all that and more.
Yeah, it's going to be a feature.
That's what I was about to say, feature length.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Definitely going to be feature length. Yeah.
Can't wait. All right. So with all that behind you, you are at the point with documentaries where other people can look to this work and start to genuinely be inspired. So for those out here that are looking at your work and saying, I'm dying to do that. I've been thinking about this one project for years. How do you expect people nowadays to actually start on the right path to something like this? What do you think are first steps that you would recommend?
Gosh. Well, I think you've got to be passionate. You've got to, whatever your subject is, if it's documentaries and you've got an idea, you've got to be honest with yourself and say, like, am I willing to put in potentially years of thankless work? The thanks might come later, which is always great, but are you willing to kind of put in the time? I think also filmmaking of any kind is a team sport. So if you want to get into that kind of thing, have a good team, find people that are good at doing stuff that maybe you're not good at doing, like
exactly.
Gary Smart is a great producer. I'd like to think of myself as a great producer, but we worked hand in hand together, solved a lot of problems together. Chris Griffiths, who was my co-director on Pennywise, is really good at editing, and he's really good at sort of seeing moments and crafting segues and finding levity and things that I'm not good at doing. So establish a team, find people, because it's a team sport, from the music to the editing to the producing to motion graphics, color grading, mixing. I mean, there's so many people that are involved in documentaries, and very few of them get the accolades, but it's a team sport. So have the passion, have the patience, and find a good team to work with, because you could do it on your own, but it's hard.
Well, and nowadays that'll probably be very evident if you did it on your own, because we all got to be honest with ourselves. Hardly anybody can do all of these in the highest quality possible just by yourselves. It's, especially if you're trying to put everything into one aspect of these, it is a lot to take under your wing.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it really is. And I guess the other thing that's so obvious, I didn't mention it at first, but I should, is find money. Find as much money as you possibly can. Because it's expensive.
Yeah.
And whatever it is, even low budget stuff. I mean, so having a revenue source helps.
What are some of the more surprising money sinks that you found?
I mean,
if you can share them.
Yeah, well, just generally speaking, I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about it, but post-production is very expensive, and like, you get it. Yeah. You're in this world. In a lot of ways, especially if you know people, like if you know people with gear, or people that are, you can get stuff shot pretty inexpensively. You can get interviews shot, really good looking interviews. But the editing, the mixing, all the post-production stuff, that's where a lot of the big money is, Yeah. And so I think some people are kind of blindsided by that. And I think you see that kind of in the sort of the lost film world as well, going back to the 60s, where people don't bank on how much it cost to distribute a film, to market a film. And by then they've spent it on their talent, they've spent it on getting it shot, and then there's no money, and then it just kind of, what does it do? It just disappears, right?
Yep.
So that's a part of it too,
It always hurts.
Legal fees, right? You want to get insurance on your film? You want to get your film insured? You got to get a legal review, right? That costs big bucks.
Yeah.
Lawyers charge you by the email. I mean, it's, and if you're an independent filmmaker, it's hard, man.
It always hurts seeing some of these that are made, and then you can tell it shot well, it had a great idea, but they seem to run out of money near the end of it. And because of that, nothing is refined. Nothing comes together in a way that actually shows a cohesive story even. Or like you're talking about with the editing, that's where a lot of the big money is. Maybe it's not edited well. Maybe it's not edited at all. Maybe it's just raw footage and it looks like that. And the hard part it takes a lot of time. And I don't think a lot of people understand that just sitting down to edit a documentary, it's not a 90-minute thing, even 5 times. Editing a documentary can take ages, and that time is a lot of money.
Oh, big time. It's a lot of work, but I sort of love the craft, and have been lucky to work with some great people, and I like most of the parts of the process, from finding people and finding archive and finding interviews and shooting the interviews, being on set, and then getting down with transcripts. I mean, like, I'm literally, before you and I jumped on our call, I mean, I was with my co-producer, and I've got this binder of Sasquatch interviews for this new doc, and it's, I mean, it's a few hundred pages and we're just going through it, and I always equate it to like archaeology. So I feel like the documentary is in here, right? Now we're just going in and
just got to find it.
Hopefully finding it, and hopefully finding something that's good. You find that out later, but I like that process too, so
yeah.
Yeah.
I, looking at some of the stuff you've done that has been inspiring to me, I'm always curious what inspires somebody that has made something that's inspired me. So what are some of the documentaries that you found closest to your heart, or something that when you were growing up was a documentary that you went, you know what, that is a perfect story, and they told it absolutely the way they should have?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, Hoop Dreams was a doc that I saw when I was young.
This is my number one go-to. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Hoop Dreams. And then, frankly, I was lucky enough to get to know the guy that made it, because I work at PBS and I work in documentary film. My day job that's what I do. I work for a documentary film series at PBS. And then, I didn't grow up with a lot of documentaries. I mean, that was not a part of my viewing diet as a kid,
Same.
Really. It didn't really come onto my radar until like probably college, when I was studying anthropology, and I was seeing like a lot of like anthropology kind of documentary things like in an academic setting. And then we did this Pet Cemetery documentary, which was an accident. It wasn't like, let's make a documentary. It's really an accident. And then, but in the last 10 or 15 years, like being in the documentary space personally and professionally, well, I say professionally, like side profession,
right?
Profession that pays my mortgage profession. There's so much good stuff out there. I mean, and I'm steeped in kind of the nonprofit PBS documentary space. There's a lot of good stuff, a lot of difficult stuff, a lot of cool stories. I mean, I'm amazed at people that are going to the front lines of Syria, or the Ukraine, and just to document the stories because they need to be told. I mean, that's the stuff that, kind of inspires me, that I'm like, wow, like I'm not making that kind of stuff myself, but I'm like, how can you not be inspired by people doing that kind of work? So we could have another conversation all just about that alone,
There is a sort of magic to some of these, and the way that documentaries can capture an entire culture for somebody that was whether willfully ignorant or completely sheltered or steeped in a life of poverty and couldn't be, learning about an entirely different world, that even something as what many people would call silly, like the idea of Snapper, can change lives and literally make somebody realize a passion. And documentaries scratch an itch that many films can never scratch for some people. And it's admirable to be in that avenue too, because it's not something that is, it's never going to make MCU money. It's never going to be something that is making tons of accolades or star power, of course, but it's something that can really show a passion, which a lot of other films, that's a much more difficult feat. So just thank you. The work that you're doing, I'm sure, doesn't get a lot of thank you. And these are important for a lot of people.
Oh, well, thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, my goal is like, I want to tell a good story. I want to sort of like celebrate people. I think people are just inherently interesting. Yeah. Everyday people are interesting. That's kind of what has led me to sort of being kind of more focused on like regional stories, and I want to like entertain. I think, escapism is important. There's plenty of those like dark and heavy kind of the world is scary documentaries, which are important. But then like there's stuff that I just, want people to enjoy, like Snapper, hopefully like Sasquatch. So, I don't think too much about it. I just sort of follow kind of what my gut tells me and what I'm interested in. And I hope that people are interested in it too. And so far, so good.
I think that gut alone shows that you're good at what you do. So far, so good. I agree. One of the last things that I've been asking people as I close these up is, what movie jumps to your mind when you start thinking of the state that you were born in?
The state that I was born in. Does the whole thing have to be filmed there?
No, just what movie comes to mind when you start thinking of that state?
Dumb and Dumber.
I love how immediate that was.
Oh, dude. I mean, I had that before I even asked my follow-up question of like, does the whole film have to be shot there? Yeah, that was such a formative movie for me, and part of it was shot in Providence, which is where I'm from. Oh yeah, man, that one. I mean, there's a bunch, but like that one for me, that was a touchstone in my youth with my buddies, and kind of to this day, that's sort of like a go-to for me when I need some junk food and just need to forget about other things and just laugh, so
those palate cleansers are needed after some of these dark docs, so I completely get that.
Oh, big time, man. Big time. Yeah. Sometimes you just need to watch someone just have diarrhea on camera, and
on that note, thank you for your time, John. We're going to end it there because that's perfect. I appreciate you. Everybody needs to watch Snapper. Everybody needs to watch Pennywise, the story of it. And I, for one, am waiting on bated breath for Sasquatch because it sounds fantastic.
Thanks, man. I'll tell you a lot more of it offline, off air.
Cool. Hopefully we can talk to you when it comes out again. Have a good one.
Oh, definitely, man. Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Disconnected Podcast. There's one big thing that you could do to help the show, and that is to leave a rating and review on the podcast service of your choice. Thank you.